Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Chantel, and you might hear my cat Ari chatting with me as I talk to you a little bit today. In today's video, first of all, I just want to apologize for not having a second video this past week. I'm currently moving a lot of stuff around in my house. Slowly but surely. It's kind of a process where I do a little bit at a time, like after work in the evenings. And so I've been kind of doing that instead of recording and editing an extra video this week, just because I want to get more done with that. So it's not a big deal. Might have a couple weeks where I go back down to just sort of like one video a week, and then as I get more moved into my bedroom and get stuff rearranged, I assume I'll probably go back to trying to do two videos a week situation. So that explains my sort of absence the past several days. Anyway, today I do want to do a book review. I just recently finished reading Fahrenheit 451 by Bradbury. And I want to talk about it a little bit. This is kind of considered a modern classic, a classic of the dystopian genre of sci-fi. And I had never read it before, and I was really interested to read it, and I really enjoyed it, and so I would just like to talk about it a little bit here. If you're not familiar with the story of Fahrenheit 451, it's as I said, a dystopian novel set in a world where our main character, Guy Montag, is a fireman. But in this world, firemen do not put out fires, they start them. Firemen specifically burn books, because in this world, books are illegal. And that's not the only dystopian thing about this world. But it is one of the biggest things that make this world dystopian. It is illegal to own books. And so when books are discovered, the firemen come in and burn them, and usually burn the house down along with the books. And so Guy is a fireman, and in sort of classic dystopian novel fashion, he starts out at the beginning of the book just sort of living his life and rather unconcerned about the situation that he's in. And then he meets someone. He meets a teenage neighbor girl in his neighborhood, Clarice, who he sort of strikes up an acquaintance with. And she asks him some rather pointed questions that get him thinking about things that he's never thought about before. And this sort of gradually leads him down a path down which he begins to understand some of the magnitude of what has been lost in a world where books are illegal, and where ideas are actively being suppressed. Anyway, got interrupted by a telephone call there. Try to pick up my train of thought again. So yeah, this was a really interesting story. There's definitely a number of things that I think are very specific to the time and context in which it was written. I want to say this book was originally published in 1953, and you can very much tell that there's a lot of very 1950s concerns in it, particularly around the sort of Cold War era mutually assured destruction kind of situation that the United States and the Soviet Union were in the 1950s. That's definitely a thing that sort of hangs over the whole book. Another thing is a sort of concern of fear-mongering around sort of the idea of quote-unquote juvenile delinquency, and like the idea of like teenagers that are extremely reckless, the sort of rebel without a cause kind of teenager that drives really fast really dangerously and gets into car accidents. So that concern definitely is sort of interwoven throughout the book, and also just the sort of the kind of fear of this exploding popularity of television is also really like strongly present in this book. Though I will say it is much less fear-mongery about television than I expected it to be, considering it was written in 1953, because there were a lot of people in 1953 who were saying a lot of really extreme things about television, which is kind of a thing that happens whenever a new technology becomes extremely popular. People did the same thing with movies, like 40 years before that. There was a lot of fear-mongering about movies. And then in the 50s, when television got big, there was a lot of fear-mongering about TV. When internet it first exploded onto the scene, there was a lot of fear-mongering about that. You can go back even further, and there's like a lot of fear-mongering in like the 18th to 19th century about the popularity of novels among the middle class. It's a whole thing. This book is actually much less fear-mongery about television than I expected it to be, but it is still clearly there, right? The idea of this having an entire room of all four walls essentially being just an enormous television screen that you can on some level interact with is definitely, it's a very 1950s television thing. And the idea of like the constant incessant and meaningless noise of specifically like the idea of like television as it was in the 1950s, which was very heavy on like almost like vaudevillian type sort of productions where you just have like a bunch of different skits all in a row, lots of, you know, just sort of live music, live bands, and lots of things like that. Essentially the equation of television with just noise, right? Just constant streams of noise, specifically so that people will ignore the state of the world around them, right? So that people will not look at nature, so that people will not think deeply about the political situation that they're in, so that people will not see or think about you know, a looming and impending kind of war situation, to distract people from the bad things that are actually happening in reality. You know, the idea that ideas themselves you know, can be are so dangerous that they need to be erased completely. So, you know, in some ways this is a very dated book. It definitely feels very much of its time. Not dated in a bad way, just, again, very much in the context of 1950s America, right? It is definitely very much a 1950s American novel. But it is also still, and in some ways, unfortunately, very relevant in its depiction of the ways in which the government entities, institutions, and systems go about suppressing the expression of ideas in society, and also some of the ways in which society tends to allow it to happen, right? I think it's Faber. It's probably Faber, who the character in the book, who talks about how you know, he was just like a literature professor, and he just kind of watched it happen. He just kind of watched people gradually over time reject reading and reject books and reject ideas kind of wholesale, because it's easier, right? It's easier to just sit down in front of a television screen and watch a game show than it is to like actually read a book that's going to challenge you and or experience or hear ideas that are going to challenge the way that you see the world. And a lot of people are just not interested in it, like a lot of people just aren't interested in it. And so and Faber talks about how he became very complicit in it. He just sort of watched it happen and he let it happen. And then by the time he realized that it was happening and that censorship was the law of the land, it was already too late and it had already happened, right? And I think that's particularly prescient as well, especially right now with sort of this current wave of, especially like this sort of local level, like school board election type situations where you have certain groups of people that are very specifically targeting at the local level, these groups, infiltrating them for a very specific purpose, which is to remove material that they personally disapprove of from usually school libraries, but they're also often trying to remove them from public libraries, and doing so on the assumption that most people will just kind of let it happen because most people don't really care or don't pay attention to what's going on. I felt like that was really prescient as well. But yeah, the idea that ideas are in and of themselves dangerous to powerful people and powerful institutions and powerful systems, is, it's a truism. It's a truism for a reason, because it is. It's just that is just correct, right? There's a reason why, there's a reason why fascists want to destroy books. There's a reason. And that's because the ideas in books are dangerous to anybody who has an authoritarian viewpoint on the world, to anyone who has a fascist viewpoint of the world. So, I really appreciate Bradbury's prose as well as the story he's telling and the characters he's created. His prose is sort of refreshingly simple and clear. There's a clarity to it that I think works really well for what he's doing here. But he also, he builds up a certain rhythm at times with his sentences that really, my cat's very, come on up here. He builds up a specific kind of rhythm at times with his sentence structure that I think it works really well, and it really is lovely, and it sticks in the mind, and it really helps, especially in a book that a lot of which is actually as much about remembering as it is about books. It really sort of leaves an impression in the mind. Here's a good example of it from towards the end of the book. Everyone must leave something behind when he dies, my grandfather said. A child, or a book, or a painting, or a house, or a wall built, or a pair of shoes made, or a garden planted, something your hand touched some way, so your soul has somewhere to go when you die. And when people look at that tree or that flower you planted, you're there. It doesn't matter what you do, he said, so long as you change something from the way it was before you touched it into something that's like you after you take your hands away. The difference between the man who just cuts lawns and a real gardener is in the touching, he said. The lawn cutter might just as well not have been there at all. The gardener will be there a lifetime. So, it's not just what he's saying that's beautiful, but the way he's saying it, the words that he's employing, the sentence structure that he's using, really works for me. It makes it a really memorable and lovely passage to read. But, ultimately, to me, Fahrenheit 451 is a book about the love of books, not just as objects, especially not as objects, but as, the ideas contained within them. And I think that this passage really, sort of encapsulates that. It's not books you need. It's some of the things that once were in books. The same things could be in the parlor families today. The same infinite detail and awareness could be projected through the radios and televisors, but are not. No, it's not books at all you're looking for. Take it where you can find it, in old phonograph records, old motion pictures, and in old friends. Look for it in nature, and look for it in yourself. Books were only one type of receptacle where we stored a lot of things we were afraid we might forget. There is nothing magical in them at all. The magic is only in what books say, how they stitched the patches of the universe together into one garment for us. I really love that description of books, what they do and what they say. I appreciate that Bradbury understood the real importance of books, because he's correct, right? That this specific object, right? The book as an object is maybe not really so important, right? What's important is what's inside it. What's important is the ideas, right? And conveying the ideas. And books are just one particular way to convey ideas. And that is what makes them important, right? In the same way that, film, to sort of talk about my other special interest, film is not the physical medium of film. It's not necessarily about the actual, physical film strip or the film canisters or, the celluloid itself. It's about the images, the ideas that are being committed to that film, that are being projected, conveyed to audiences. That's where film lives. That's where its significance lies, right? And it's the same with books, right? The ideas within books are where their significance lies. The conveyance of the ideas, the ways in which writers transmit ideas to the page, and then readers take those ideas into themselves and allow those ideas to change them and potentially change the world. That's the significance of books. And that's Fahrenheit 451. It's a really good book. Highly recommend it. Highly relevant, despite the fact that it's now over 70 years old. And I think that's, a big part of the significance of books in general, and this book specifically, right, is that it remains extremely relevant, so relevant that it is, in fact, it is itself often challenged and banned even today, in various parts of the world, including, I'm sure, the United States. There's a lot of book banning movements right now in the United States, which is highly, highly unfortunate, and everyone should be paying attention. Everyone should be voting in your local school board elections and your local municipal elections, particularly, because that's where a lot of these fights are happening. And we want to make sure that we don't want ideas to be repressed. We don't want ideas to be repressed. That's bad. Let's not do it. Let's keep reading Fahrenheit 451. Let's keep learning from it. And let's keep ensuring that ideas can continue to be conveyed in books like this. So that's really all I have to say about Fahrenheit 451. I obviously gave it 5 stars. I don't know how I could have given it anything else. Next week we're approaching the end of April. So I'll probably be talking about some of my plans for May, hopefully. I'm not even sure what my plans for May are going to be. So we'll find out together. As always, if you've read Fahrenheit 451, leave a comment below. Tell me what you thought. What other great dystopian novels are you reading lately? Whatever you feel like talking about. Like, subscribe, the usual stuff, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.